Safer Sanctuaries Nurturing Trust Within Faith Communities is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on its trusted policies and procedures. To learn more, go to safersanctuaries.org or call 800 972 0433.
This is an audio-only podcast, and so we often talk about things like strategy and what social media platforms are up to, and even the words we choose for headlines and posts. But so much of putting all those things into practice requires turning them into visuals, or at the very least, supporting them with visuals. You can certainly turn to services like Canva that are full of customizable templates, or you can rely on free, high-quality stock photos from a site like Unsplash that, in certain circumstances, can stand on their own. But sooner or later, you're likely going to need to design something yourself. And so today on this audio-only MyCom Church Marketing podcast, we are talking graphic design. Thank you to everybody for listening. My name is Dan Wunderlich. I'm a United Methodist pastor, and the person who is going to help us tackle this challenge is Will Patterson. Will is a professional graphic designer with his own studio based in the UK. You can also find him both teaching graphic design and building a supportive community of designers via his YouTube channel, his own Reddit community, and a class on Skillshare. Will, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. That was very kind words of you.
Well, you certainly win the prize for longest distance interview. And so you're right off the bat winning accolades. But before we jump into things, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into design, and what you love about what you do?
Sure. So I'm from the north of England. That's the best part of the UK. And essentially the way that I got into design was I did really bad at school. I didn't have any qualifications really. We have these things called GCSEs in the UK, and it's basically when you're 15 to 16 years old, that's what you sort of decide what you want to be when you're older.
Yeah.
And you have to pass these exams. And I don't learn that way. At the time, I didn't realize I didn't learn that way. I essentially learned by doing things, experimenting and trying. So I didn't get any qualifications. So I went to I thought to myself, I want to do a business when I'm older. I want to be a businessman of some sort, but I also play guitar. I could do circus skills, so I could juggle and stuff, perform. It's very odd. But I sort of knew back then that if I learned things better by just doing it myself. So I went to college because I had to do something. So that's not like a university. It's just a tech college to learn what I thought was business studies, but it turned out was business administration. So like administrative tasks, which wasn't what I thought it was. So I still did it for 2 years. And I sort of left when I was 17, turning 18. And I thought to myself, I could just probably learn graphic design. I was already, dabbling in Photoshop and messing around with things. So I thought to myself, well, I really want to do something creative, and this is something that people make money off. So I'm going to try and learn that. So 2 years later, after hours of just sat at home every day in my parents' house, learning the tools and the theories behind things, reading books. There wasn't many videos. So every time I learned something, I would teach someone that, whether it's like a Photoshop tip or whether it was something else. So I sort of filled the gap there. And from there, that sort of became a marketing ploy as well as a moneymaker. So people would find me teaching, and then they would want me to do the work for them. And then I would also get paid teaching. So it's kind of like this cycle. And then today we sort of have too many clients, or we had too much stuff going on. So we became an agency instead of doing freelance work, because that's all I could do. I could only do a few designs every week or so. So that's where we are now, where I teach, and I sort of learned by doing.
Absolutely. When we talk on this podcast a ton about the value of content marketing and about how if you put out videos for free on YouTube if they are serving people, they will come to you. And so if not, before we even get into graphic design, Will, you're like the walking embodiment of a strategy we teach on this podcast. And so that's really awesome. What do
Yeah,
you love
it's
about it?
basically
What do you
being.
love about getting to serve people?
I feel useful. Um, I think there's a lot of content online is based around entertainment, and that is useful to an extent.
Sure.
But if you've got a small audience, I still class myself as having a small audience. No matter how far you grow, you'll always think you have a kind of a small audience
Yes, absolutely.
when you look into it. I think just being useful is what I like. I like the fact that I've got kind of creative freedom. I kind of like the fact that I get to teach something because I never thought, for me not passing any of my qualifications at school,
Mm,
I wouldn't be able to teach. So being able to teach someone not just the craft, but the way that I do it, so which is like quite different from a lot of other people. For example, we don't do revisions in our agency. We stay
mm.
away from them, and people don't understand how that works. They think it's we just deny a revised piece of design, but we don't. We sort of just work with the client and show them as many concepts as we think is necessary, and we sort of reduce it down from there. So the way that we, instead of giving them logos and then getting them to choose it, we sort of have a collaborative way of working with the client where they are in the sort of room with us choosing, and we give advice based upon what we think is best, and they sort of, most of the time, 90% of the time, they'll listen.
Yeah.
So I love that fact. There's a lot to love about it though. There's so many things that go into it. It's not just one singular aspect that I love. There's quite a few things.
Well, and this desire to serve and be helpful, is that part of the impetus behind your Reddit sub community or subreddit, I guess as they call it? You've created this space for people to share their designs and get feedback, and you feature some of them on your YouTube channel. But so much of it is you're just connecting designers with each other. I mean, the vast majority, 99.9% of the comments are not from you; they're from this community that you've put together.
Yeah, like none of the comments are for me really, aside from the odd time where I might say this is great, or I might look on it. I'm quite bad at creating communities, ironically. The Reddit one I'm still surprised worked. And the reason why
Mm,
is because I've tried Discord, and because it was live, every
right.
time I went on, people would have the expectation that I would talk to them. And I get overwhelmed very fast when
Sure.
I got loads of people talking to me. So the Discord didn't really work out. But the Reddit ones are sort of organically grown to like 20,000, whatever they're called, like members.
Yeah.
And essentially the community here is just self-serving. I sort of give my comments on it, and people have the hopes that I would feature them in a video, or I would pick out the best ones. The way that came around was obviously it's easy content,
Yeah,
which sounds
absolutely.
terrible. So it didn't come out of me being, if I'm being honest, like useful. It came out of like, how could I critique people's logos without them sending it to an email
Right.
where I don't know whether people like them? So I created this Reddit thinking, oh, everyone can just put their work on there, and I can just scroll through the best ones, the ones that are most upvoted or downvoted, and then see what people want to see, and then introduce that to a new audience on YouTube. So, and in doing that, I'm being useful. That's like the catch with everything. I'm being like functional and useful to the community by telling them what, as a professional, is wrong with their
Yeah.
design, or what they could improve on, or highlight what is good about a design. If that
That's
answers the
awesome. You
question.
sort of tricked yourself, stumbled into being useful. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I first ran across you on YouTube and I was immediately hooked. You offer a great mix of really direct, practical videos where you share tips or how to use specific tools or functions in design programs, but you also showcase your process a ton. You'll give yourself a design challenge, or like we said, you'll offer feedback on designs posted by the community in your subreddit. And spoiler alert, Will is also going to be with us next month to talk about logo design. But today, I want to ask you about 5 graphic design hacks that I think can immediately elevate our design game regardless of our skill level. And one of Will's recurring features on his YouTube page is 10 hacks in 10 minutes. Will, I'm only going to ask you about 5, and you have more than a minute per one. So
Oh,
uh,
great.
we'll, we'll see how this goes. Hack number 1 is actually to start with a pencil, physical or digital. The first design hack may not sound like one, but I see it as one of the keys to your process as I watch you on YouTube. And that is actually not starting in Photoshop or Illustrator, but you start with a pencil and a notebook or an Apple Pencil on your iPad with a sketching app like Procreate. Why is it important for you to start this way?
I think it's boiling things down to first principles. Again, it's a lot 99% of graphic design and the way that we communicate should be done where you can draw it
Mm,
out, whether it's a layout. So even with our YouTube thumbnails, sometimes what I'll do is I'll draw out on my iPad or on a piece of paper the frame of the thumbnail, and then I'll block out where I want things. Um, in doing so, you're essentially simplifying things down, which I think good design in a corporate world is simple. I think fun design in a non-corporate world is a bit more complex.
yeah.
Um, but drawing takes away the distractions from your computer. And it also allows you to be a bit freer. Having the limitation of a pencil means that you're limitless in what you could draw. But
Mm,
it also restricts you from using tools. And I think that's the main thing is everything that we use on a computer is a tool. So being able to just draw a very bad logo in a couple of seconds and then sketching and refining it even more. If you can draw that logo in a couple of seconds and you can identify it, it's seeable when it's small and it's appropriate to the industry that you're in, then you should take that into Illustrator then, because your goal is to be able to give a logo or a design to someone else, whether it's like the Apple logo or whatever, and you want the consumer or the viewer to be able to draw that out in a couple of seconds too after
yeah.
remembering it. It's a way of testing it out, but it also gives you creative freedom in the fact that you're not bound by the tools in Adobe Illustrator.
Absolutely. Well, and I think some of us might think, oh, well, certainly that minimalist style is just a fad. But no, like, think of the top logos you can think of, whether that's the Nike swoosh or the Apple, or even think of the logos on the front of every car you drive past. The H for Honda
Mm.
or the Ford in an oval. Like the logos that are imprinted on your mind are very simple and are memorable. And so I think that's an excellent tip. I also noticed in one of your videos, you talk through the process of like maybe sketch 20 ideas in 10 minutes or something
Yeah.
like that. And it gives you the chance, because I'm not as fast in Illustrator as I want to be. I watch people like Aaron Draplin just like fly around Illustrator. But I'm having to Google things, or I'm having to figure out what tool to use. But
Sure.
with a pencil, it just comes out immediately.
Yeah, I think with Illustrator, I use the same tool every time. There's not much, and that's mainly the shape tool, the pen tool, and the direct selection tool. That's it. That's what a good logo is based upon, or maybe the Pathfinder or the shape builder tool. Sometimes
Yeah.
I think, yeah, drawing 20 ideas in a few minutes. What that does is it gives your brain sort of a necessity to draw badly. Every logo that I've
Yeah.
done starts terrible, and yeah, I get a lot of flack for it online, but because people will stop the video there when I'm drawing terribly, and they're like, "What is this guy doing? He's a terrible designer." But I think an idea always has to start bad. Then it's further refinement. Simplifying something down as well is very complex, which is kind of odd. It takes a lot of thought and trial and error. So in order to sketch a lot down, you'll have 99% bad ideas, and then from there you get to choose. So it actually is easier on you rather than going to a blank canvas and saying, right, I've got to create the best logo ever for this client. What you do is you're just reducing down where you've gone and you're giving reasons as to why. So it makes it a lot more of a enjoyable process.
Definitely. And I'm a perfectionist, and for some reason that doesn't show up with the pencil, but as soon as I jump into Illustrator, I want it to look like it's done. And so I end
Yeah.
up spending, 20 minutes on one rather than 20 minutes on 20 ideas. So that's awesome. Well, let's jump to number two. The second one is no doubt familiar to anyone who has formal design training, but it just might be an easy and incredible upgrade for people like me who are largely self-taught, and that is to use grids. Will, what makes grids so important and so powerful in graphic design?
Grids give continuity and harmony to the design. You know, the if you were to look at a track, you've got a beat when you're listening to music. It's keeping your designs on beat and
Mm,
keeping them tempo and paced well. So essentially, a grid allows the human eye um, to easily see information. And the reason why we use these grids is it gives us a limitation of where we can put our work. Obviously, you can break the grid. I'm not saying
right.
everyone should do it, but for everything that you see, including YouTube, every website nearly uses a grid of some sort because it allows the human eye and for people to easily access and digest information. And what it does is it just allows you to put the right information and the right groups of information in the right space that makes sense. And the grids are actually well used after the Second World War because of this. You know, after
Mm.
the old time stuff, that was when grids became massive. There's a great book called Raster Systems or Grid Systems that I would urge anyone with a spare weekend or anyone who wants a dopamine detox to read because it is quite boring, but it is very interesting of how grids have really helped everything in design and visual communication. So that's what grids do.
Well, and I feel like oftentimes using a grid, and particularly you mentioned YouTube, like framing shots, and this is in video, not necessarily graphic design, but the rule of thirds. If your
Yeah.
subject isn't centered, putting them exactly at the third, it feels different than if someone is slightly off of the third, and the average viewer can't put their finger on it, but they know when it feels wrong and they know when it feels right. And I know when I'm designing in Photoshop or Illustrator or InDesign, and I know, like, hey, this headline and the body text and the logo all need to line up on the left, but I don't have a specific way, like specific how far it is off the edge of the page, and then I've got stuff on the right, and I'm it makes it so much easier, and it's almost this unconscious design hack, really.
That's true. I think as well as grids, learning type and how type should be laid out will help a lot. Once you put those two things together, then that's when you'll start to see your work feel good.
Yeah, and that leads us perfectly into hack number three. And this might have been the first trick I saw you teach on like a YouTube short or something, and that is scaling type. You have a trick for scaling
Mhm.
type. We have all designed things that need a hierarchy. We'll have a headline, a tagline, body copy. We're either doing that on a flyer or maybe our bulletin, or for me, the worst is on a web page. I'm working in a what you see is what you get website designer thing, and I'm trying to get all the type to look right, and we sort of randomly change type sizes and line spacings until it feels right. But will you use a very simple math trick to get at least a very good starting point?
I do, yeah, and I use this for everything as well. Really, you don't have to. It's called the golden ratio or the Fibonacci sequence, where if you were to have a headline to start with your body text, don't do what I did in the video. It's kind of I did it for the video, I did it for the
Mm,
Vine sort of thing, but
yeah.
you start with the body text and you want to sort of have the body text to be readable. So about 14 points in the body text. And you want about 7 to 10 words per line in a paragraph. That's how you
Mm,
know it's readable and you know that's good. Then what you want to do, if you want to have like a subtitle or even just a slightly larger type, you would times that font weight. So let's say 14 points to 1.618, which is the Fibonacci sequence. When you do that and you times it, it will get larger. That's like the Fibonacci sequence. You keep repeating that, and you'll have a harmonious scaling and a nice composition, not composition, but a nice consistency to how large and small it is. Another trick is to, whenever you have a headline and then a subtitle and then body text, always skip two weights. That will give nice contrast.
And so there, are you talking like bold to regular to light, or skip
It depends
to
how big the
intervals of type size?
Yeah, so it depends how many you've got in your font family. If you've
Sure.
got like a true typeface where there's loads of fonts within it, then skip two. If you've got one typeface, then skip one. If you've got a variable font, then just times it or divide it by 1.618.
Awesome. Yeah, the variable type, that is a relatively new development. I'm sure you've been working with it for years, but fonts that are not broken up into 2 or 4 or even 8 weights, but literally infinite thicknesses and thinness.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing. I'm 39. I'm almost 40. I feel like I'm an old man because I learned Photoshop in college. I was an advertising major, and we were the last people to learn how to do paste downs, like print off the type, print off, make camera ready art. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. That seems like such a cool innovation. Do you play a lot with variable fonts? I know you're a big font guy and you're a font
Yeah.
designer. Is
I
is
make
that
them.
something
Yeah.
that you see as a positive?
Yes, yeah, variable fonts are just great. They're harder to do, but well, they're easier to work with, but harder to make in
Yeah.
some respects. Anyway, depends what app you use, but it's fun making them and it's fun using them. Yeah.
And now let's take a brief pause to hear a word from our sponsor.
Safer Sanctuaries. Nurturing trust within faith communities is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on the trusted policies and procedures that have guided churches over the past 25 years. This resource contains theological grounding for the work of abuse prevention, psychological insights about abuse and abuse prevention, basic guidelines for risk reduction, age level specific guidance, and step by step instructions on how to develop, revise, update, and implement an abuse prevention plan in your church or organization. For Christians, resisting evil and doing justice are ways that we live and serve Jesus Christ. Safer Sanctuaries provides help to do just that by framing this work as a life-giving, community-enhancing, and proactive endeavor. It enables communities to be empowered and flourish as they develop and implement policies and procedures that make everyone safer. To learn more, go to safersanctuaries.org or call 800 972 0433.
And now, back to our program.
All right. One of the things I love about your videos is that I almost always learn some new tool or technique in Photoshop or Illustrator. Like I said, I'm self-taught. I've been messing around with those programs for over a decade, and yet I still learn how to use the most basic tool in the proper way it's actually supposed to be used, because Will, you taught me that. And I encourage our listeners right now, just pause the podcast, go find Will's YouTube channel, especially if you use Adobe apps. But this is audio only. And so I was trying to think through what's a feature or a tool that didn't require us seeing it to understand it. And I picked out smart objects. Will, can you talk to us about what smart objects are in Photoshop and why we should be using them more than we are?
Yeah, so smart objects are essentially a type of layer in Photoshop where you can take any image or any sort of art that's in that layer, create a smart object, and it will allow you to non-destructively edit that image, or it will allow you to retain its like pixel density all the way throughout some resolution. It's basically a non-destructive way of keeping your work intact and
Yeah.
being able to edit things. It's kind of like the layers feature when that came in Photoshop. They needed
Yeah.
to find a way where you could, you, like a like masking, where you didn't destroy everything whilst you're creating it. You can also update smart objects. So, for instance, if you've got a layer with a logo in it and you want to change the logo in that layer, then you could create a smart object, double click on it, and it will bring you to a new window where in that window you can change anything inside it and it looks like another Photoshop document, because it is. And then when you press save, it will automatically save to that previous smart object that you were just working in on that final presentation or whatever you're working in.
Yeah, you had a really great YouTube video here in the late spring, early summer of 2023, where you showed us a treatment of type. You sort of distorted the type, but you left the original word as a smart object, and then you used adjustment layers and different filters applied to that, so that you basically saved this really intense style. You know, it's not like
Yeah.
word art from Microsoft Word back in the early 2000s. And then you can go into that smart object and change the word. So you could literally work up a really intense and thick level of editing the type, and yet still be able to change it.
That's right. Yeah, it's insane. Like that functionality alone is how mock-ups are made in
Yeah.
Photoshop. Once you learn it, you'll realize then, oh wow, okay, this is how Photoshop really works. That and
Yeah.
masking.
Yeah. And I think we've all destructively edited things and then had to start from the beginning, or
Yeah,
start way further back in the process. So,
still
all
do.
right. Yeah, that's true. That is true. All right, for our last one, let's tap into your passion for typography. And so, whether it's type as a logo, type as the primary element in a design like a poster, or type as the workhorse for delivering information, it's critical that what we produce is both aesthetically pleasing and easy to read. Can you share some of your tips around type? I'm thinking about things like spacing. You do a lot of videos on kerning and spacing. You've also taught a bit in some of the videos around making sure there's proper space around a logo or the elements of a logo. If it's got a word and an image, how we space those properly.
Yeah.
Or even customizing letters. You teach a lot about taking a standard font and customizing a few of the details to really make it your own.
Yeah, sure. So spacing in type, essentially, I'll give some definitions very fast. Leading or lead in type is this amount of space in between an overall word. So in the characters of an overall word. Kerning is the space in between individual characters in a word. Now, every font has been designed to have good, or should have been designed to have good kerning, which
Yeah.
is very difficult to do. And it takes like hours unless you've got a cool plugin that I've got, which I won't talk about now, but later.
Yeah.
Essentially, good kerning is difficult to understand when it is good kerning, because it's quite subjective still in the design community. That's why we can still edit it. Now, to make sure you have good kerning, I just tend to tell people to go quite tight. Bring the letters quite close to each other, squint your eyes, make it blurry. If it looks like one solid object when it's blurry and nothing sticks out to be too heavy on the right, left, or whatever, then that's pretty good, because you've got to always think about how people are perceiving your logos, which is often in periphery vision. They don't
Yes.
always look directly at it. So we've got to make sure it looks good in periphery. With spacing and other terms, it's the biggest, or should I say the most um, undervalued thing in design when people are taught or when people try. Don't fill up the space with loads of things. Less is actually more most of the time. It depends if you're a graphic designer or an artist. Those two
Mm,
things can be quite different.
sure.
For some, it's not, but for me, it is. Um, so having negative space, or sorry, white space, which is the empty areas, knowing where things should be empty can be tricky, but essentially it's all about how the composition is on the page or wherever you're working. So to sort of learn how this works, the best way of doing it is taking a composition from someone else that you've seen that's inspired you, and using that and identifying where the negative or white space is within that composition. And that will sort of train your eye. It's more of an experience type of deal, rather than an artistic one. And customizing, just use the pencil tool. There's one in Adobe Illustrator. It's called the
Yeah.
pencil tool. If you just highlight your type, if you create outlines on the type first, so that makes it into a real shape, not a live text editable thing. If you use the pencil tool, crank the smoothing up, and you can do that by double clicking on the pencil tool in the toolbar. You can like draw over the letters and you can customize it, but you can
Mm.
also just use the direct selection tool once you've outlined the text, and you can just mess around with it and create something really funky and cool. It does look a bit more playful most of the time, but that's how you can do that. Hopefully I
That's
explained
awesome.
it well there.
Oh, no, definitely. And again, people go to Will's YouTube channel, you'll be able to see him. But we all know when we see poor kerning. One of the things that frustrates me to no end is one of the sports teams I follow has a font with really sharp angles at the end of each, at the bottom of the letter and the top of each letter. And when they type it out, it will create just funky spaces between letters. And it'll look like
Yeah.
one word is actually two words, and it frustrates me to no end as someone who likes that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you see that all the time too.
Oh yeah, it's annoying. Like I'm obsessed. It's not really a passion of mine, it's an obsession.
Well, Will, thank you so much for teaching us these 5 hacks, and thank you for your time today. We look forward to having you on our next episode where we'll talk about logo design. But until then, for folks who want to follow your work or connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Just type my name on YouTube. It's probably the best and the easiest way. Or you can go to my website, which is willpatterson.design.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Will, and we'll chat with you next month.
Thank you.
And now, listeners, we want to hear from you. Which of these design hacks are you most eager to try out? Do you have any tips or tricks that you've learned and want to share? Email us at podcast@umcom.org, and we just might share your tips or tricks on a future episode. And you can, of course, use that email, podcast@umcom.org, to send us any feedback or topic suggestions you have for the show. We always love hearing from you. As always, the easiest way to support the show and to help other church communicators like yourself find it is by sharing this episode with your friends and colleagues and by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to us right now. And did you know that United Methodist Communications has celebrated over 80 years of ministry? Your support ensures that the latest denominational news, dynamic stories, and informative articles will continue to connect our global community. Make a tax-deductible donation today at resourceumc.org/giveumcom. Thanks again for listening to the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast.
Safer Sanctuaries, Nurturing Trust Within Faith Communities is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on its trusted policies and procedures. This resource contains theological grounding for the work of abuse prevention, basic guidelines for risk reduction, age-level specific guidance, and step-by-step instructions on how to develop, revise, update, and implement an abuse prevention plan.